And I think if you check this, you'll find that that's true. Well, that's the Middle East. Let's turn to Central America, the other main focus of the plague by depraved opponents of civilization itself. Here I'll be brief, because at least the core parts are just uncontroversial. At least uncontroversial among people who have minimal regard for international law and international institutions and so on. Actually, the size of that category is very easily estimated. Namely, ask yourself how often what I'm now going to say has appeared in the discussions about the evil plague of terrorism in the past 5 months. Huge flood. How much has been devoted to some uncontroversial cases? Again, uncontroversial if you think the World Court and the Security Council and international law have some significance. Well, in 1986, the International Court of Justice condemned the United States for international terrorism, unlawful use of force, in its war against Nicaragua. Again, I'm going to keep to the guidelines, bend over backwards, allow this to be interpreted just as international terrorism, not the war crime of aggression. So we'll call it international terrorism. The court ordered the United States to terminate the crimes and to pay substantial reparations, presumably billions of dollars. Congress reacted by instantly escalating the war, by new funding to escalate the war. Nicaragua took the matter to the Security Council, which debated a resolution calling on all states to observe international law, mentioning no one, but everyone knew who was meant. The U.S. vetoed it. Nicaragua then went to the General Assembly, which passed similar resolutions in successive years. The United States and Israel opposed. In 1 year, they got El Salvador. All of this is out of history. It has to be. It's just inconsistent with our preferred image of what history is supposed to be. And as I say, you can check how much this has been. These are uncontroversial cases. You can check to see how much it's been referred to recently. And remember who were the individuals responsible, people like Negroponte, proconsul of Honduras, Rumsfeld, special envoy to the Middle East, and so on, and others. Plenty of continuity. Well, the U.S. reacted, as I said, by escalating the war, and also for the first time giving official orders to its mercenary forces to attack what are called soft targets. That's what the Southern Command called them, soft targets, meaning undefended civilian targets, agricultural cooperatives, and so on. That was known. It was discussed in the United States. It was considered legitimate by the left. So Michael Kinsley, who represents the left in mainstream debate, he had an interesting article. He was then editor of the New Republic, in which he said that we shouldn't be too quick to condemn State Department authorization for attacks on undefended civilian targets, because we have to apply pragmatic criteria. We have to carry out cost-benefit analysis and see whether, as he put it, the amount of blood poured in is compensated by a good outcome, namely democracy, what we will determine to be democracy. And what that means you could see by looking at the states next door, like El Salvador and Guatemala, which were okay democracies. And if it passes our test, then it's okay. So in other words, international terrorism is fine, assuming it meets pragmatic criteria, and now across the spectrum, left or right, among we, that is, educated, privileged intellectuals, not the population, of course. In Nicaragua, the population had an army to defend it. It was bad enough. I mean, tens of thousands of people killed, the country practically devastated, may never recover, but it had an army to defend it. In El Salvador and Guatemala, that wasn't true. The army was the state terrorists, the U.S.-supported state terrorists. They were the army. There was nobody to defend the population. And in fact, the atrocities were far worse. Also, they're not a state, so they couldn't go to the World Court and the Security Council to follow legal means, of course, without any effect, because we, people like us, have determined that the world is going to be ruled by force, not by law. And since we have the power, as long as we determine that, a state that tries to follow The legitimate means of responding to international terrorism has nothing to do. But that's our choice. Nobody else's choice. Can't blame anyone else on that for that. In order to carry out, there was, however, enough popular resistance, not elite resistance, but popular resistance to the atrocities there that the U.S. had to resort to an international terrorist network, an extraordinary international terrorist network. Remember, the U.S. is a powerful state. It's not like Libya. Libya wants to carry out terrorist acts. They hire, Carlos the Jackal or something. The United States hires terrorist states. We're big guys. So the terrorist network consisted of Taiwan, Britain, Israel, Argentina, at least as long as it was under the rule of the neo-Nazi generals. When they were unfortunately removed, they fell out of the system, Saudi Arabian funding. Quite a substantial international terrorist network, never been anything like it. In contemporary terms, we might call it an axis of evil, I suppose. The outcome, again, keeping to the guidelines we believe our leaders, the result was hundreds of thousands of people slaughtered, millions of orphans and refugees, every conceivable atrocity, the region devastated. The single uncontroversial case, Nicaragua, which was the least of them, that alone far surpasses the crimes of September 11th, and the others suffered far worse. This is, again, we're bending over backwards and giving the U.S. the benefit of the doubt, so we're only calling it international terrorism organized by depraved opponents of civilization itself. Well, that's the second major area, Central America. All of this, however, is off the record, too, in the current history journal, and it's typical in this respect. Nothing that I just have referred to is mentioned, nor is it in the whole scholarly literature, in fact, except way at the margins. You can check and see. It just doesn't count. The 80s are described as the era of state-sponsored international terrorism, but they're not referring to any of these things. The U.S. was trying to prevent state-sponsored international terrorism by taking proactive means, like the most massive international terrorist network that's ever been known. That's